Hi, everyone. Welcome to our March 2021 WellNurse Spotlight. My name is Charlene Platon, CEO and co-founder of WellNurse App, and we are so excited today to have you all. And WellNurse is on a mission to empower nurses to be their best selves. And so we host these monthly WellNurse Spotlights to highlight nurses and their journeys of self-care and well-being, and also to highlight the diverse profession of nursing. And so for today's Spotlight, we have our co-founders on the call. And so they will be here to screen questions during this conversation. And as a reminder, this is a live stream chat. And so we are live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And we will be able to see all the questions that you have or the comments, and we will do our best to respond to those questions and those comments as they come through. And so please feel free to add your comments or add your questions during the duration of this conversation. And we would like to start by first introducing our co-founders. So let's have Kathy, please introduce yourself. Oh, you're on mute, Kathy.
Oops, so sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Schaefer. I'm an associate professor at Thomas Jefferson University, as well as a compassion fatigue professional and a co-founder in WellNurse.
Great, thank you. And Jillian?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jillian Littlefield. I'm a co-founder of WellNurse and nurse, also pursuing a degree to become a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And thank you for all joining us.
Great, thank you so much, Jillian and Kathy. And we are so very excited to announce that our March 2021 WellNurse Spotlight for today is Joanna Seltzer Uribe, RN MSN. And Joanna has worked in kidney transplantation for over a decade at a #1 ranked institution in New York and New Jersey. She's been exposed to design thinking through a master's series at Stanford's D.school, and she also taught at New York University, Rory Myers College of Nursing's first course in design thinking to graduate nurse informatics students starting in 2017. She then went on to become a design thinking lead in 2018 to 2019 for an Alex and Rita Hillman grant to integrate design thinking into an accelerated undergraduate nursing curriculum, which has so far reached over 400 undergraduate students. And to nurture a beginner's mind and embody the nurses are everywhere philosophy, Joanna's roles have included podcasting, yoga, nursing, community design, and most recently, online education design strategy. She is currently the project lead for Nurses You Should Know, which is a year-long online initiative designed to narrow the representation gap of nurses of color. And her goal is to leverage nursing education as a springboard that equips the next generation of nurses with the tools of creative confidence, self-care, tech competence, and equity and inclusion. And so we are so excited to have you here today, Joanna. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And there's so much to talk about here, Joanna. You have such a unique background in nursing, and we would just love to hear first about your journey in nursing. And could you tell us about your career and what ultimately also inspired you to venture out of the clinical nursing world?
Sure. So I was very serious about dancing from about age 8 to about age 18. And a knee injury sort of pivoted me to have to think about, going to college and growing up a little bit. And when I took an anatomy and physiology class just as an elective, I just completely fell in love, and I really appreciated going from knowing about my body, from using my body, to actually learning about the physiology and anatomy of my body that is not part of dancing curriculum. So I decided to go into nursing, and I really had my heart set on being a midwife. And I got all the way to the last semester of nursing school, and I got into that first, L&D experience in labor and delivery where you see a baby being born. And I realized it was a little bit overwhelming, and I didn't think that I would be able to pursue midwifery. So I graduated, I started med surg, I ended up in kidney transplant as a specialty through doing some travel nursing. And at the time that I was entering healthcare, it was really this bridge era of everything becoming computerized. And one of the assignments I had as a travel nurse was in a kidney transplant unit in the outpatient side, and 100% of everything was paper. And I guess I was young enough. I didn't really have any particular technical prowess at that time, but I was really kind of young enough to wonder like why the computers were not working in our favors. We had a lot of processes that were on paper and flow charts and handwriting things, but they were designed by nurses and they really met our needs. And we had cheat sheets about the patient's medications, and we could easily see what their last labs were. And when we started the transition into the electronic medical record, we were losing really important data pieces about our patients that we used to have at our fingertips. So I kind of just started tinkering at first and speaking directly with, the computer programmers and the IT department, trying to make it what we needed it to be for patient safety and for our efficiency on the nursing end. And I eventually learned that there was a specialty called informatics. And I started kind of my more non-clinical work through entering informatics. But quite frankly, in my career, I think I've been really fortunate because I've always been really embedded within the clinical setting. So I don't necessarily feel like I've left the clinical role per se until I started teaching in higher education. But I always had this opportunity to really integrate the technology and the needs of the patients and the nurses and the clinical team with their electronic medical records, or with figuring out and designing the processes alongside with them.
Great. Thank you so much, Joanna. And I really appreciate you sharing your background and how you got into your different roles in nursing. And I think it's so interesting that you mentioned starting off in wanting to be a midwife, because I feel like in nursing, there's just a lot of times where we think we might want to be in one place and then we go to a very different direction. So I really resonated with that, being someone who was, who studied to become a family nurse practitioner, and I never practiced as a family nurse practitioner. So I thought that was really great to hear. But wow, I think that what you shared about how you got into informatics was so interesting, and really speaks to the impact that nurses can make when it comes to process, and when it comes to efficiency, and when it comes to technology even. And I know that's not something that nurses are typically associated with, right? In the healthcare field, is impacting the technology. And you went into an informatics program ultimately, right? Can you tell us about that, or how that experience was in that program?
Yeah, so most informatics programs that I'm aware of, and I only know so much, so I don't want to misspeak, but the program that I went into was a graduate program. They may also have some certificate programs, but it's sort of in the same realm as being a nurse practitioner, right? Except instead of graduating and being able to prescribe medicine or work with that level of autonomy, you graduate really with an expertise in understanding how you translate healthcare needs with technology. You don't necessarily learn a specific, say, Epic or Cerner or Allscripts or some of the names that we're familiar with, but you really understand what is data. How does data work in terms of, the healthcare setting? How can you organize and design data to be efficient and to give providers insight? And so you're really looking at a range of different ways to solve solutions within the healthcare setting.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I feel like all of this work also ties in really well with your role in education, or your passion for nursing education as well. And can you tell us a little bit more about that too, and how you pursued or started to pursue education in your career?
It really came out of me kind of staying in touch with the director of my informatics program as I was in the field, and always, I don't know, every few months, every few years, just giving her feedback and saying, oh, this is what I'm learning in the actual field. Like, this is what I'm seeing in the healthcare setting, as opposed to kind of the papers or the theory. And some of it I would write to her and be like, thank you so much for teaching me X. I just did, that in my job or in my role. And other times I would be, sending her a message being like, hey, I really wish we had learned Y or XYZ, right? And one of the things that I had learned when I actually was applying informatics was a lack of design. And so I had this interesting role that I did hybrid informatics, and I was taking a transplant center that was all on paper and bringing it completely electronic. And that spanned the outpatient setting, the ER, the OR, inpatient, the laboratory, the diagnostics, the radiology. It was a very dynamic experience to be part of that team. And I also was doing the quality. So if there was an error that happened, then I was part of the team that would review the error, do root cause analyses, and come up with ways to have process improvement. And I recognized that a lot of the times that errors were happening, it really wasn't the clinician's fault, but it was actually a design issue, whether it was a button that was hidden or in the workflow, something that was being forgotten, that it wasn't obvious and intuitive. And as a clinician, you're doing 27 things at all times. And so I felt like there was a design element that hadn't been addressed in my curriculum. And within only a few months of graduating, I kind of self-initiated my own education in design. What we call it in the tech space is user experience design, or UX for short. And that led me to start studying human-centered design. And then I went to Stanford's D.school, where I met people like Rachel Acker, who is a designer that I have been in touch with ever since, even though we're 8-9 years later. But really trying to incorporate the role of design. So not just looking at data, not just looking at, the clinician's needs or the patient's needs, but actually looking at how we design the screens and the interfaces so that we can either reduce errors or make something seamless. And that's kind of what started it, was learning on my own the way design is incorporated into the informatics process, and then sending her emails saying like, hey, we need to, share the Kool-Aid here. We need to really prepare informatics nurses with more design background.
Yeah, that's great, Joanna. And I really love how you mentioned the design aspect of healthcare and the impact that nurses can have in that. And I feel that design thinking is still a fairly new kind of way of thinking about healthcare. Would you agree with that? Do you think it's, I'm not sure how many nurses you've encountered that really know about design thinking, or do you feel like it's still a fairly new concept for nurses?
Yes and no. I think for me, because I started a program in teaching design thinking and we scaled it out from graduate to undergraduate, I've seen it sort of be catch like a wildfire. It really, really resonates. I've taught faculty, I've taught train the trainers. So in some regard, I feel like it's really starting to disseminate. But I also recognize that I am in a specific pocket of, the country and of, nursing education. So I can't exactly scale that out. But there's certainly, people like Marian Leary, who has created a free online design thinking course, and Bonnie Clipper, who was the previous VP of Innovation at the ANA, who really created an entire white paper and then subsequent publication. I think that we have a couple of people that are really trying to spread the word on it. I don't want to be forgetting anybody, but that it's new to nursing, but I think it's gaining speed.
Right, I definitely agree. I think that especially in the past few years, it's really taken off, and it's really, there's really been a lot surrounding design thinking in so many different ways. And for nurses who are interested or who want to learn more about design thinking or want to be part of it, what are your recommendations, or how do you think they could be further involved in that work?
Sure. I think that there's a lot of accessible online tools. So IDEO or IDOU has developed really like an entire curriculum of very easy online modules that are both synchronous and asynchronous. So you can digest some of it on your own time, and then you're also interacting with other people in the class from different disciplines, which is incredibly enriching. And they have a lot of content. Some of it might be covered by your employers for the courses. And also Marian has a free online design thinking for nurses, designthinkingforhealth.org, I believe is the website. And she, again, goes through the different steps of design thinking. It's a free course, very well designed, very engaging, and really using the principles of design to design, an engaging way to reach nurses with podcasts and videos and case studies. I think what sometimes, there's this silo that nurses can think like, oh, well, design is over there. Like, I'm over here. I'm a nurse, I'm in healthcare, and design is over there. It has something to do with like your house or, your color scheme. And design thinking is actually just a way to approach a problem. And so in design thinking, it's very similar to the nursing process. And so I think that's why it resonates so much when you go through like your 5 steps of your nursing process of assessing and diagnosing and treating and evaluating. There are very correlating phases of design thinking that actually are aligned and in sync with what we're already doing. That's sort of innate to our profession. So you go through empathy and ideation, empathy, definition, ideation, prototype, and testing. And so it's a very similar process. You get a patient in front of you and you're trying to collect information. You're trying to understand what happened, the origin, the symptoms, the data points, the vital signs, the labs, right? And then you're trying to come up with your diagnosis. But a diagnosis in healthcare is a statement, diabetes mellitus, post kidney transplantation. And in design thinking, you actually use your definition phase as posing a question. And so through asking a question, you can really have like a radical collaborative process where you are actually looking for different ideas about how to solve something. So it kind of can open up, I think sometimes, in healthcare or in any organization, we have all experienced this kind of, well, we have always done it this way, or we don't have the money for that, or we don't have the resources for that, or we don't, it's almost like an automatic no. And so when you're in a culture like that, you almost censor your own imagination and your own creativity, because before you've even invested in wondering or imagining or creating or collaborating with someone on how to solve something, you're already like, no, we've always done it this way. I just have to suck it up, or I just have to shrink, or I just have to shrug my shoulders or mumble in the hallway about the frustrations. And through the design thinking process, it can empower you because you're asking, how might we, improve the care? How might we reduce the ER wait times? How might we? And so it's really kind of cultivating this sense of optimism that a solution is possible. And I think that way you can allow that creative process to happen.
Right. And you mentioned so many great things just now, Joanna. And I feel like when it comes to the design thinking process, there are so many components that are actually pretty similar to what nurses are already familiar with. Just like you mentioned with the nursing process, there are these steps that do have a lot of parallels with the design thinking process. So it is interesting when people think about the two, they kind of separate it, but it's actually very similar, and there's a lot of integrated parts. So I'm really glad that you made that comparison. And I especially love the mention of the how might we statements. I think it's a really empowering way to think about a problem and to think about a solution for that, especially in healthcare. Like you mentioned, it could be really easy to go down the path of, complaining or venting. But then when you think about design thinking, it really empowers you to think about it in a different way that is a lot of times a lot more, a lot more empathy driven, a lot more patient centered, and it really makes you feel more engaged, I think. And a lot of this work too, you mentioned how nurses might think of themselves as separate or outside of design thinking, and I feel like some of that is also pretty similar to how nurses might think about innovation, right? And you're one of the inaugural Johnson & Johnson Nurse Innovation Fellows. Super excited that we're both in the same cohort, and I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about that too. How did you get into innovation work, or how did you find out about the J&J Nurse Innovation Fellowship, and what are you currently working on there?
Yeah, the J&J Nursing Innovation Fellowship, I guess, popped into maybe an email or social media, and at one point, I think I'm a founding member of SONCIEL, which is the Society of Nurse Scientists, Innovators, Entrepreneurs, and Leaders. And I think there had been some email asking for maybe judges to be on a panel to review some of the Nurse Innovation Fellowship applications. And I saw it and I said, actually, I feel like I really want to go through a fellowship, because at that point, I knew of maybe 2 other people in nursing that were doing design thinking. I started my training in design thinking in 2012. I, started teaching in the classroom in 2017, and it was just a small handful of people in the field that were really trying to integrate these 2 disciplines. And I felt like I really needed an opportunity to kind of explore that further. And I think so far it's given me some tools and ways to apply principles of change theory and looking at organizational change, looking at different case studies, having a really cohesive group of nurses to brainstorm with and problem solve with, and thinking about like what are the levers in nursing education that we can use in order to advance the field.
Right, exactly. And thank you for mentioning all those different parts of innovation. I'm really glad that you found out about it. I feel like it's so interesting when we ask our different co-fellows how they found out about the fellowship, because it's been very different pathways. So I feel like it's just so interesting when we all have our different journeys that way. And what would you say is your main focus right now as you're pursuing the fellowship? Because I know you've been working on Nurses You Should Know and some other projects. And is that the main focus right now for your fellowship?
Yes, I had, I guess, a pivot in tandem to the fellowship. I started a doctorate of education, because I felt that there was, as I was doing design thinking work, as I was in the nursing education space, I found that there was a need to really understand humans. And even in informatics, so much of what you're doing is actually change management. And so I felt that I knew a certain amount of technology. I was proficient. I was capable and competent in the design or the technology. But what I really felt was kind of like the deep sea, that was this unknown, was really understanding like humans and humans' behavior. So I enrolled in a doctorate of education in organizational change, because I felt like when you're trying to design something, when you're trying to change something, when you're introducing something new, you need to really have this understanding of humans, human behavior, human psychology, sociology, in order to be able to advance something. Because sometimes what happens is you just get all this resistance, and it can kill something that's actually really valuable. So in my doctorate work, I had been working on an assignment around 2019 or so, and I was doing some research into nursing history, and I came across a nurse, and her name is Estelle Mazzy Osborne, and I came across information about her in articles, and she is this extraordinary woman who was the first Black nurse to get a master's degree. And she went on to become the first Black nursing faculty. And then she went on to actually help to integrate the American Nurses Association. And then she went on to actually integrate the US Army Nurse Corps. And as I'm reading about this nurse, I'm wondering, how come I never really had information about this nurse in the way that I did about, someone like Florence Nightingale, who is such an icon in our profession. And as I came across information about her, I saw an actual letter that she wrote that was saying to the ANA, like, we need to integrate. These are the reasons why. And right next to her letter, I saw a letter from a white nurse. Again, this is primary source information from, the 1930s, 40s era. Another letter from a white nurse saying, we don't want to integrate. These are the reasons why we should have separate, nursing organizations and why we should have segregation within nursing. And I felt as a white nurse that this information had never, ever been explained to me. And I felt that there was an entire history of nursing that had really never been part of my curriculum, despite having over 6 years of education and getting a graduate degree. I felt that there was an educational deficit. And that led to multiple conversations with other nurses in the field. And over time, it turned into the Nurses You Should Know project, so that we can really leverage social media to reduce the representation gap of nurses of color, and also to make sure that the history that we know of our profession is more widely known and certainly more inclusive.
Yes, thank you so much, Joanna. I really appreciate, the work that you're doing with Nurses You Should Know. And when I found out that you were pursuing this journey, I got really excited because I had a similar experience as you did. And just like you mentioned, when I was in nursing school, I didn't hear about this other side of nursing history that isn't really discussed or talked about, or it's not really, we don't really know about it when we go through our undergraduate or graduate studies. And so I think that it's really great that you're bringing this into the spotlight. So I really appreciate that. And do you want to, let's see here. I know that, okay, thank you. But can you tell us a little bit too about how this project might relate to nursing well-being? Because I know that when it comes to representation, a lot of it could be attached potentially to your self-care journey. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. One of the things that I did, and I'm just keeping an eye on the time because I might have to jump on to my phone shortly, but one of the things that I did during my doctoral work is I kind of rehashed my career through the lens of my whiteness and being white, and what doors were open to me, and what barriers were reduced for me. And I think that when we live in a culture and in a society where one group of people is favored or privileged, I think that there is a stress that is almost like under the radar, like a frequency that is almost like omnipresent. And there is a grave mental health issue that one of the people that I've worked with on the project is Anu Gupta. And he is an attorney and a scientist, and he is a TED talker. I'm happy to post, podcasts of him, but we include his work in the Nurses You Should Know project about implicit bias in healthcare. And he really talks very articulately about the pressure and the impact when you live in a culture where bias and discrimination is flagrant, where it's okay, where it's validated, and what that does to you from terms of your mental health, in terms of your psyche. And it's something that everyone is impacted with, whether you're sort of in the in group or the out group. But there is a constant pressure to either go against a stereotype about you or prove people wrong, or that you're not seen for who you are as an individual. And so always having to kind of be up against that is really a taxing, has a long-term emotional impact.
Right. And thank you so much, Joanna, for telling us about that and for sharing that with us. It is really challenging, and there is an impact, just like you mentioned, on everyone when there are these biases that exist in the profession, that exist in healthcare. It can really impact how you go about your nursing journey and how you practice, right? And it could really impact what you do, what you say, or what you don't say. So it really permeates throughout the whole culture of healthcare, and so it's really this kind of powerful but invisible force that people haven't historically talked about. And I think that especially with all the different challenges that are going on right now, it's really been brought into the limelight, and people are being a lot more aware. I've been seeing a lot more implicit bias trainings pop up, and a lot of different conversations being started about this very topic. But yeah, I mean, it just hasn't been, this type of discussions just have not happened historically, or not on this broad of a scale. So I think what you're doing is really helping to promote those conversations, and I think it's really powerful. And are you okay with the time, John, or do you need to go and?
Yeah, I'm. My whole computer it looks like it has about 2 minutes, and it's like rebooting at this exact second. If you want to, I guess, talk amongst yourselves for a minute or collect any questions that are in the chat. I'm so humiliated that this is happening at this exact second. But I'm going to just jump onto my phone and I'll join right back in.
Yeah, no worries. We'll see you soon. Okay, so can you all hear me, Catherine, please?
Yes.
Okay, and I know you had some really good discussions in our chat about what Joanna was just saying. Do either of you want to share your own experiences with this? Have you ever heard in your education about diversity and inclusion in nursing, or any sort of experience like that?
So I can jump in here. Honestly, no. And it really wasn't until this, I guess this year, right? So I'm this years old, people say like, today I just discovered, right? So I have to say at 54 years of age, I have been a nurse for almost 30 years. We took what Florence Nightingale said as gospel, right? But we're discovering that there were a lot of things that we didn't know about that other nurses contributed to the founding of nursing. And I think through Joanna's work, it's very enlightening. And I think it gives some of us who really just stand here and say or question, how do we really be an ally to our colleagues? That it gives us, some way to be involved and to be an ally and to, really start to maybe push back a little bit on nursing education and say, there needs to be other areas or other theorists or others that need to be incorporated or pulled into if we really want to be culturally competent, have culture of humility. Those are just my thoughts. Jillian?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in my own personal experience with nursing education right now, that's not something that we've been taught or, it hasn't been talked about. And, as Kathy mentioned, we do talk about cultural humility and competence in regards to our patients. But I think we're missing this other half, this history that is important and will inform how we practice and how we relate to fellow nurses. And just like she was mentioning about nursing being like siloed and stuck in their ways. I think that's very much the same in nursing curriculum and the way that nursing schools are run. I think change is hard, and it's hard for people to think outside of the box and make important changes that are needed.
Great. Thank you so much, both Kathy and Jillian, for sharing. And I feel like just from hearing from everyone here, it's really common that we haven't had this education or have had these discussions about diversity, about inclusion, about representation of other nurses in the profession, and just knowing that there are so many people who have contributed, but we don't necessarily hear their stories. There is a lot of room for improvement there, and a lot of room for improvement for how we educate our nurses, how we get other nurses to feel like they are represented and to feel like they're part of the profession in this light. So it's a lot to that we could all work on collaboratively, and just really grateful for Joanna's work on that. And I think that she's still working on her connection, so we could still continue to talk a little bit too. I think. Wait, let's see. Is she here? Oh, there. Oh, actually, I think she's back. Let me try this. Hi, Joanna. Can you hear us?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
It's okay.
So sorry. It was like it kept popping up, and it was like this is not, you can't reset it, you can't change the time. Like they're like, don't even try to do that change button, like, when the button is grayed out because you can't even push it to later or something. I am so sorry. I'm back. I'm fully, you have my undivided attention without further technical glitches.
No worries. We're just so glad to have you here and to have this discussion, because it's much needed, right? And I feel like even with the topic of well-being, self-care, innovation, a lot of these things are brand new, and it's really, I feel like, has only really been brought up in the last year or two, which is really recent.
Well, I think
right?
so. I think, yeah, and I think for me there was a huge epiphany and reckoning when I started really studying our actual history. I saw that innovation and social innovation and challenging the status quo is actually the bedrock of our profession. It's not a novelty, it's not a trend, but we need to look at all of the history of all of the different groups of nurses that have contributed. And if we only look at a specific subset, we're not getting our full story. And the full narrative of nursing, I think, is in some ways, it's almost like having a conflict with itself. Like, I think there was this idea of nursing with like the white hats and subservient to physicians, following the rules, following your orders. Same time, in tan narrative, literally historically happening at the same time, were all of these groups of nurses in the status innovating care. Where is care happening in the community, in health, in school, that we're looking at preventative health, that were challenging status quos that were discriminatory. So it was so eye-opening to me when I really started learning our history to see that nurses are rebels. Nurses are innovators, like at our core, like for over 200 years. And I think that we need to bring that forward.
Yes, I really love that, Joanna, and I absolutely agree. Nurses are rebels in the fullest sense of the word in multiple different ways, and I feel like we are one of the best professionals who do think about the status quo and who think about questioning it, how we could do things differently, because we're so involved and we're so integrated into those different fields of healthcare. We really are in the best position to do so and to question and to improve and innovate. So I think it really speaks a lot of volume to what nurses do and how they think and how the impact that they can make. And, in terms of thinking about well-being, we love to ask our guests too about their own self-care journeys. And I know that you're really passionate about well-being and self-care. we've had a lot of discussions about that as well. And I would love to just hear more from your own personal viewpoint, how you came to be involved and be passionate about that, and where did that all stem from, and anything that you'd like to share with nurses about that.
Well, like a lot of nurses, self-care came to my attention of the lack of self-care. I, had at least a decade within nursing going through, the grueling school experience, and then, working your night shift, hour shifts, always on my feet, always sleeping during the day, then transitioning into informatics where I was mostly in front of computers, Monday through Friday. It was really after I had my daughter and I was in the backyard one day and I had my shoes off that I started to just feel like I hadn't stopped. Like I just started to recognize in my body that in 10 years, I had just never stopped. And I think that was the beginning of a pivot for me, in trying to prioritize myself. And I really was able to peel back where I had learned all of the habits of not putting myself first. And it really did come back to some of the culture of nursing school and of nursing, that you're really like the last person that gets cared for. And I think when I combined nursing and becoming a mother, I realized that the only person that could really put myself first was me. And I think that we have an opportunity to really think creatively and redesign nursing curriculums so that the habit and the rituals that nurses create and graduate with will help their resiliency in the long run, because they can actually allow themselves to rein in and mitigate the burnout before we get to that point. And it's not just about, doing yoga and taking a deep breath. You can't really remedy a broken system with self-care alone, but it is a part of it. And so I think that really looking critically at how we teach nurses, there's no reason why we can't demand a lot and, put in assignments and do your practicum hours, and also allow nurses to have time off to reset and recharge so that they're able to bring themselves into such a demanding field where you're really asked a lot emotionally and intellectually and physically.
Right, and there's a lot that you mentioned there, and absolutely with self-care too. For my own journey, I also pursued it because of the lack of it, and that definitely started with nursing school. And you just don't really feel that support that to go through such a challenging curriculum, to go through such a challenging time, and even before you start as your professional career begins. But when it comes to nursing school, I know you mentioned, the need to change it. And how do you envision self-care to be incorporated into core curriculum for nursing school? And I guess what would the ideal look like to you?
Yeah, I think that nurses should earn credit for taking care of themselves. I think we need to, I don't think that that is a ridiculous statement. I mean, it sounds silly when it comes out of your mouth, but genuinely, we need to shift the mentality around self-care as something that I'll get to later. I'll get to after my midterms. I'll get to, at the end of the semester. I'll get to on my days off. Like, we need to, I think, within nursing, give, it's a gift. I've worked with Marie Shanahan and Veda Andrus from the Birch Tree Center for Healthcare Transformation, and they are brilliant holistic nurses. They're one of the first nurse practitioners I think in like 79, 80s when nurse practitioners first started coming out, and they're like this OG holistic nurse team, and they go to hospitals and they have a whole curriculum for nurses. And I've been in the room when they have allowed nurses to have space for themselves. And it's such a powerful thing because by incentivizing to nurses their own self-care, they can actually become not just a well of resilience, but they can support each other. And I think what happens is that everyone is burned out, and then everyone kind of pulls each other down with them. And I think when you're in nursing school, there is such an over-reliance and reduction on the GPA and the test and the 0.3 of a point, that you didn't get or that you did get. And I think we need to, just the same way we talk about, patient-centered care, we need to look at the holistic nature of students and of people that are going to become nurses, which is a field that is really embedded in care. And there's a huge emotional component involved in being a nurse, as well as all of the scientific and intellectual and problem solving and collaborative pieces of it. So by allowing nurses to receive credit for their self-care, then they are developing the habits and the rituals that they need when they become professionals, and they can become change agents. So if they can be a model of self-care, they can in turn also become change agents for other nurses, other healthcare providers, as well as for their patients.
Right, exactly, Joanna. And I love that idea you brought up about incentivizing self-care and incentivizing the development of those habits as you pursue your education and then take that with you into your professional careers. I think that's absolutely important. And it's just so funny because in the current state, if you do prioritize your self-care, you're actually, it's more of a punishment almost than an incentive. And I've seen, I've had friends, and I know different people in my life who had pursued nursing or healthcare education, and then did not want to do so anymore because of that kind of backlash from wanting to prioritize yourself first. And it's interesting because it's kind of this oxymoron, right? Where you're in a caring profession, you're in the caring service, but in return, if you want to take care of yourself, you're met with resistance, or you could be met with, consequences, which is really unfortunate. So I think that now is a really good time, especially as we've seen with the pandemic, right? With COVID-19, a lot of nurses have been stressed, a lot of nurses have been burnt out, and we don't have that infrastructure built up to take care of them when it comes to their own well-being. And so that has really led to a lot of consequences in the industry at large. So I think it's a really pivotal moment in nursing, and hopefully with these conversations, with these initiatives and ideas, we could really change that. And
well,
Sorry,
I think that part of self-care really is the mental health piece of it. And so in nursing, there's a lot of compartmentalization that happens in order to get through your shift. And the key is creating a safe space for nurses to take down those walls. You may need to compartmentalize in the scope of your shift, but then where can you decompress? Where can you grieve? Where can you cry? Where can you be weak? Where can you be in pain? Where can you be vulnerable? And being able to create those safe spaces for nurses so that they don't feel like they have to hold it all together all the time. So many nurses are also caregivers, either for children or for loved ones or in their community or for their parents. It is so important to have a space that's non-judgmental and safe for nurses to be able to express their emotions. And I think that that normalizing that and allowing nurses to express themselves, whether with each other, whether with therapists, it has to be completely part of our profession because it is an emotionally demanding profession, and we need to have that infrastructure built into it.
Right, absolutely. And when it comes to nursing and nurses and their well-being, do you have any recommendations for nurses, like any recommendations for what they can do for their well-being or how they could prioritize their self-care at this moment while we are still working on building that infrastructure and that safe space?
Yeah, I guess I would say um, three things, I guess. The first is I really believe in microdosing. And so sometimes your life is all over and you really have like a 10 or 15-minute window. And I think being deliberate about how we use the time that we do have becomes really critical, and becoming aware of how the way that we can use our time can either deplete us or rejuvenate us. Um, I think that it's very easy to get almost caught up in like a very strict perception of like this wellness culture of like really expensive Lululemon pants and a certain physique and certain like Instagram lighting, and that you need, a certain kind of, food and, workout room and soundtrack and all of these things, like just to, define something as wellness. I think wellness can be delivered in micro doses. I have an adult size hula hoop and I will just throw in a podcast and hula hoop. I will take off my socks and my shoes and earth and ground and be barefoot in my backyard. I think that there is an opportunity in microdosing to incorporate pieces of wellness into your day on even your longest days, when you're putting out a million fires. I think we need to really have this sense that 5 minutes, 10 minutes can be an investment towards getting you through the rest of the day. So one thing I would say is sort of microdosing and finding those microdosing opportunities. If you aren't able to carve out 45 minutes or an hour or whatever it is, that utilizing a 5 to 10 minute window is vital. And I think it's easy because of how much stimulus we have on the floor in our lives. The call bells, the being pulled in this room, in that room. When you're not at work, the phones, the social media, the emails, there's so many things that are just inundating us, and finding those 5, 10, 15-minute windows where you can either find stillness or you can just bring the attention to yourself. Those really small windows, I think, go a long way. A second thing I would say is finding your tribe. So even if you are on maybe a toxic unit or in sort of like a hustle mentality, or a place where nurses are eating their young, find your tribe within that is going to support you. Find your tribe of nurses that normalizes emotional aptitude and validating your emotions and your emotional journey. That tribe will really, I have a tribe of nurses that I've known since nursing school, and we can cry together. We're on, WhatsApp together. We're supporting each other. The tribe is so profound for your well-being and feeling connected and feeling like people have your back even when you're at your worst. So yeah, the microdosing, finding your tribe. And then the last thing I would say is really finding your self-compassion. I think that there is, as I alluded to, kind of this perception of wellness as like this competitive, superficial, outside in thing. But wellness is an inside out game. And so finding that self-compassion, I know, like, I've had some quarantine weight. I know that my things and my schedule is all over the place because I am now in this weird world where like I get my time when and if my kids are even in school or making it into in-person school. And we have to have self-compassion. We have to be able to not, put wellness like on this unattainable pedestal, but recognize that who we are and where we are in our bodies right now, today, is completely okay, and that we are worthy. And I think being able to find love and gratitude and appreciation for yourself, who you are today, and be able to practice your self-care as self-love for where you are and giving to yourself, I think is a healthier dynamic than feeling like you have to meditate or you have to, do XYZ to look a certain way. I think that, when you're going to practice self-care, you want it to be framed within a lens of self-compassion and love and gratitude.
Yes, thank you so much, Joanna. You brought up a lot of great points there when it comes to nurses and their self-care. I really like the recommendations you had and the self-care practices that you do for yourself as well, including the grounding. I really love that. And I think I really also resonate with what you mentioned about microdoses, because I think when it comes to self-care, it could feel so big, it could feel like such a huge task to, it almost kind of feels like you're either extremely good at your self-care or you're not. You're either able to meditate with no thoughts and you're like just really good at it, or you're not. And so just like what Jillian's saying here, sometimes for people the hardest step could be to just start. And I really agree with that. And I think a lot of times when nurses do want to start, they're already at a point where their self-care is really at the brink, and they're really exhausted. Do you have any thoughts for how nurses could just begin to start or think about it in those microdoses, or any recommendations for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what self-care means is identifying what you need. So it's not about, reading a magazine article or an Instagram post. There are certainly plenty of recommendations out there if we want to go find them, but it's actually it's an inside out job. It's understanding like, oh, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I need to close my eyes. I need to take a nap. Or, oh, like I am really like achy and sore and I haven't moved in a while. Like, let me go take a walk. Or, I've just done like 4 shifts in a row and I've been, in the hospital lighting for 96 hours. Let me get some sunlight. So I think that it's when you compare like shoulds or make self-care a to-do, then it's like a self-defeating. I really feel like self-care is simply tuning into yourself and asking yourself, what do you need? And I think as nurses, as caregivers, you're always so extending about what other people need and asking them what they need, or thinking about what your kids need, or thinking about what your patients need, or thinking about what the healthcare team needs. And I think the radicalness of self-care is saying, what do I need?
Yes, I think that's a great point and a great question just to start with. Just that assessment, just like how you'd assess your patients, how do you assess yourself? And that's something that we're trying to accomplish too with WellNurse and our app, is to really get nurses or have nurses begin to think about that check-in with themselves, and to begin to have nurses think about, how am I feeling today? How is my body? What are my needs? And I think that's a really good starting point. And I really appreciate you mentioning that. And I can't believe we're already at the end of the hour here. It was such a great, there's just so much more I'd like to talk about with you. We'd probably have to have you come back for another conversation. But is there anything else you'd like to mention, Joanna, to the nurses who are on this call right now, or who are listening in?
I mean, I think that this is a movement that I just can't wait to see grow. I think when we have one nurse that takes care of themselves and models self-care, that nurse inspires another nurse. That nurse then inspires another and another and another. And so I just applaud your app and your project and your company. And I think that the more the conversation gets rolling, the more we can impact change. And I think that hopefully the pandemic has been a catalyst for change, and there will be a very real opportunity within the nursing education space, within healthcare organizations, to really provide nurses and other healthcare professionals with the kind of wellness infrastructure that's needed for us to sustain our roles.
Thank you so much, Joanna. We really appreciate you saying that. And I feel like we've all been working together to do some amazing work. And we really love everything that you've done in nursing when it comes to design thinking, innovation. Nurses, you should know. There's just so many contributions you've made as well. So we really appreciate you. And thank you so much for that. And with that being said, we are at the end of the hour, and just really want to appreciate and thank everyone for joining us today. We had such a dynamic talk with Joanna. And just in addition to updates about us and what we're doing with our app, we are really excited to announce that on May 6th, which is the first day of Nurses Week, we will be launching our broader beta testing. So we will be able to have lots of nurses join us in pursuing our app and making it better and making it an amazing wellness tool for nurses to use. So stick around and stay tuned for updates about that. And we have our social media. So if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing as well, feel free to follow us. We have our link showing up right now for how you could follow us and engage on social media. And we will continue to have these monthly WellNurse spotlights to highlight nurses like Joanna and other nurses who are pursuing their own self-care journeys and wellness journeys. And so thank you so much. Thank you again, Joanna, for joining us. And we really appreciate you all. Take care and stay safe.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.